The slam of the car door still echoed in my ears, even over the Arizona, heat shimmering off the asphalt. "I can't believe you said that, Julian." Adriana had spat, her voice tight with a fury I hadn't seen in months. We'd been bickering about something trivial, the kind of argument that usually fizzled out before we even reached our destination. But this felt different, heavier, a storm brewing beneath the surface. "What? That I think your mother interferes too much?" I countered, regretting the words the moment they left my lips. Adriana's family was a minefield, one I usually navigated with extreme caution. "She's my mother, Julian, and she's just trying to help." Her knuckles were white as she gripped the steering wheel, her gaze fixed straight ahead. We were parked in the crowded lot of the Safeway, the relentless sun beating down on the roof of our SUV. "Help or control?" I muttered under my breath. Adriana's head snapped towards me, her eyes blazing. "That's unfair, is it?" I challenged, feeling a surge of frustration. Every decision we make, every plan we have, she has to have her say. It's exhausting, Adriana. Silence descended, thick and suffocating. The air conditioning, usually a welcome respite from the desert heat, felt inadequate. I could see Adriana's chest rising and falling rapidly. "You know what, Julian?" she finally said, her voice dangerously low. "I need a minute. I'm going to stay here." "Okay," I said, sighing. "I just need to grab a few things anyway." "Milk, eggs." I trailed off, noticing the rigid set her jaw. "Are you sure you're all right?" She didn't answer, just stared straight ahead. I hesitated for another moment, a knot of unease tightening in my stomach. But the Arizona sun was relentless, and the thought of the cool air inside the store was appealing. "I won't be long," I said, reaching for the door handle. I stepped out into the heat, the wave of dry air hitting me like a physical blow. I glanced back at the car. Adriana still hadn't moved, her silhouette unyielding against the bright sunlight. I shrugged, figuring she just needed some space to cool down. We'd both said things we regretted. A few minutes apart would probably do us good. The automatic doors of the Safeway slid open, releasing a blast of icy air. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, and the familiar scent of produce and baked goods filled my nostrils. I grabbed a cart and quickly navigated the aisles, picking up the milk, eggs, and a loaf of bread. My mind was still replaying the argument, the sharp edges of our words. I knew I should apologize for the comment about her mother. It was a cheap shot, and it hadn't solved anything. I paid for the groceries, the cashier's cheerful "have a nice day," sounding jarringly out of sync with my mood. I pushed the cart back out into the parking lot, the heat instantly enveloping me again. I scanned the rows of cars, expecting to see our familiar silver SUV. But it wasn't there. My brow furrowed. Maybe she'd moved closer to the entrance? I wheeled the cart further down the aisle, my eyes scanning each vehicle. Still nothing. A prickle of unease started to crawl up my spine. I pulled out my phone, my thumb hovering over Adriana's contact. Maybe she'd texted me. I unlocked the screen. No new messages. A cold dread began to settle in my stomach. This wasn't like her. Even when she was angry, she wouldn't just leave. Not like this. Not without a word. I started walking, pushing the shopping cart, my pace quickening. I retraced the route we'd taken into the parking lot, my eyes desperately searching for the silver SUV. Each empty space where could have been felt like a punch to the gut. The reality hit me with the force of a physical blow. She was gone. She had actually driven off, leaving me here, stranded in the middle of a sweltering Arizona parking lot with a cart full of groceries. My legs felt weak, and I stopped walking, the shopping cart rattling to a halt beside me. I stared at the empty space where our car had been, my mind reeling. Why would she do this? What had I said that was so unforgivable? The sun beat down on my head, the heat suddenly oppressive. I felt a wave of dizziness wash over me. This wasn't just about the argument. This was something else. Something deeper, something colder. A terrifying thought began to form in the back of my mind, a seed of suspicion that sent a shiver down my spine despite the heat. I pulled out my phone again, my hand trembling slightly. I scrolled through my contacts, my eyes landing on a name I hadn't called in months. A name I tried to forget. Mark, Adriana's colleague. The one I'd always had a bad feeling about. Had she gone to him? Was this some elaborate, cruel way of ending things? The thought felt like a knife twisting in my gut. I stood there, alone in the baking heat of the parking lot, the weight of the grocery bags a heavy burden in the shopping cart, the silence broken only by the distant rumble of traffic. And in that moment, a chilling certainty washed over me. This wasn't just about an argument. This was the beginning of something much, much worse. The Arizona sun beat down relentlessly as I stood there, the abandoned shopping cart a stark symbol of my sudden isolation. My phone felt heavy in my hand. Calling Mark felt like admitting defeat, like validating the worst of my suspicions. Instead, I took a deep breath, the dry air stinging my lungs. Panic wouldn't help. I needed a plan. My wallet was in my pocket, thankfully. I had a few dollars, enough for a bus ticket, maybe. But where would I go? I had no family in Phoenix, no friends I could impose on. Adriana and I had built our life here together, a life that had just evaporated in the sweltering heat of a grocery store parking lot. I looked around, trying to get my bearings. I vaguely remembered seeing a sign for a community resource center a few blocks away on our drive to the store. It was a long shot, but it was better than standing here feeling sorry for myself. Leaving the groceries behind, a small, pathetic sacrifice to my new reality. I started walking, the heat radiating off the pavement, burning through the soles of my shoes. The resource center was thankfully closer than I remembered. It was a low, unassuming building, but offered a sliver of hope in my desolate situation. Inside, the air conditioning was a welcome relief. The place was bustling with people, a mix of individuals seeking help with various issues. I felt a pang of shame as I approached the reception desk, but the kind smile of the woman behind it put me somewhat at ease. I explained my situation, the words tumbling out in a rush of disbelief and hurt. She listened patiently, her expression sympathetic. She provided me with a list of temporary shelters and pointed me toward a job board. The shelters were all full, or didn't allow men during the day. My stomach growled, a sharp reminder that I hadn't eaten since breakfast. The job board was filled with mostly manual labor positions. I scanned the listings, my eyes settling on an ad for a dishwasher at a diner a few miles away. It wasn't glamorous, but it was a start. The diner was greasy and loud, the air thick with the smell of frying food. The owner, a burly man named Frank, looked me up and down with a skeptical gaze. I explained my situation, trying to sound confident despite the tremor in my voice. To my surprise, he offered me the job on the spot. "Can you start tonight?" he asked, wiping his hands on a stained apron. "Yes," I said, relief washing over me in a small wave. "Yes, I can." The first few weeks were a blur of exhaustion and loneliness. I slept on park benches until I managed to save enough for a cheap motel room. The work was hard and monotonous, the endless cycle of dirty dishes a constant reminder of my fallen state. But it was honest work, and it gave me a sense of purpose, however small. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. I slowly started to piece my life back together. I found a slightly better motel room, then eventually a small, dingy apartment. I learned the rhythm of the diner, the rush of the lunch hour, the quiet lull in the late afternoon. Frank, despite his gruff exterior, turned out to be a decent guy. He often slipped me extra food and even gave me a small raise after a few months. One evening, while I was scrubbing a mountain of plates, a waitress named Maria struck up a conversation. She was a young woman, barely out of her teens, with bright eyes and a warm smile. She noticed I kept to myself and seemed genuinely concerned. Over the next few months, Maria became an unexpected friend. She'd share stories about her own struggles, her dreams of going back to school. We'd eat our meager staff meals together, and sometimes, after a particularly long shift, she'd offer me a ride back to my apartment. 5 years. 5 years had passed since Adriana left me in that parking lot. 5 years of washing dishes, of saving every penny, of slowly, painstakingly rebuilding a life I never asked for. The initial shock and hurt had dulled over time, replaced by a quiet resilience and a gnawing sense of unanswered questions. I rarely thought about Adriana anymore, or at least I tried not to. The memories were too painful, too confusing. I had moved on in a way. I had a routine, a job, a small circle of acquaintances. But there was always a void, a missing piece. The life we had built together, however flawed it might have been, was gone. And I was left with the remnants, trying to construct something new from the ashes. One particularly slow Tuesday evening, Frank told me he was thinking of selling the diner. He was getting older, he said, and the work was getting too much. He offered me first refusal, knowing I'd been working there for so long. The thought took me by surprise. Owning a business? It was a far cry from the life I had envisioned for myself 5 years ago. But the idea sparked something within me, a flicker of ambition I thought had long been extinguished. I spent the next few weeks working extra shifts, saving every dollar I could. Maria encouraged me, offering to help out in any way she could. It was a long shot, a huge risk, but the thought of being my own boss, of finally having some control over my life, was too tempting to ignore. After weeks of negotiations and paperwork, it finally happened. I was the proud owner of Frank's Diner. It was a small, greasy spoon, but it was mine. I painted the walls a brighter color, updated the menu slightly, and even hired another cook to help with the workload. Things started to look up. The diner became a local favorite, known for its hearty breakfasts and friendly atmosphere. I worked hard, often putting in long hours, but it was different now. It was my own effort, my own success. One afternoon, a few months after I took over the diner, the bell above the door jingled, announcing a new customer. I looked up from behind the counter, wiping my hands on my apron, and my breath caught in my throat. Standing in the doorway, looking slightly older but instantly recognizable, was Adriana. Adriana, just the sight of her name, a name I hadn't uttered aloud in years, sent a jolt through me. She looked different. Older, of course, as was I. The lines around her eyes were more pronounced, and her hair, once a vibrant auburn, now had streaks of gray. But it was still her. The same sharp features, the same intense gaze. "Julian?" she asked, her voice a hesitant whisper, tinged with a hint of surprise. My mind raced. What was she doing here? After 15 years of silence, why now? What could she possibly want? I managed a nod, my throat suddenly dry. "Adriana, what are you doing here?" She hesitated, her eyes scanning the diner, taking in the changes. I was just passing through. I saw the name. Frank's Diner. I remembered you mentioning a place like this years ago. A lie. A flimsy, unbelievable lie. We hadn't spoken about greasy spoons in Arizona in the months leading up to her departure. My heart started to pound in my chest. There was something else, right? I said, trying to keep my voice even. Well, Frank retired. I bought the place. A small, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips. You always did like to cook. That stung. It was a casual remark, but it dredged up memories of happier times, of Sunday morning breakfasts we'd cooked together, of laughter and shared intimacy. Yeah, well, necessity is the mother of invention, right? I replied, the bitterness in my tone sharper than I intended. An awkward silence descended between us, broken only by the clatter of plates and the murmur of conversation from the other customers. Maria, who was wiping down a nearby table, glanced over at me, a question in her eyes. I gave her a slight shake of my head, signaling that I needed a moment. Can we talk? Adriana finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I hesitated. Part of me wanted to tell her to leave, to disappear from my life again as suddenly as she had 15 years ago. But another part of me, a stubborn, lingering curiosity, wanted answers. "I'm a little busy right now," I said, gesturing to the few customers waiting for their orders. "But maybe after the dinner rush." She nodded, her gaze dropping to the floor. "I'll wait." And so she sat at a corner booth, nursing a cup of coffee, her presence a strange, unsettling anomaly in the familiar comfort of my diner. The next few hours crawled by. I tried to focus on my work, on the orders, on the banner with my regulars, but my mind kept drifting back to the woman in the corner. What did she want? Why was she here? As the last of the dinner customers trickled out, I told Maria I could handle closing up myself. She gave me a knowing look and wished me luck before heading out. The diner was quiet now, the only sound the gentle hum of the refrigerator. I walked over to Adriana's booth, my heart pounding in my chest. She looked up as I approached, her eyes filled with a mixture of nervousness and something else, something I couldn't quite decipher. "So," I said, pulling up a chair opposite her, "you want to talk?" She took a deep breath, her hands fidgeting with her coffee cup. "Julian, I know I owe you an explanation." 15 years is a long time to wait for an explanation. "Adriana," I said, my voice laced with a weariness that went beyond the long hours I'd worked that day. "I know," she said, her voice cracking, "and I am so sorry for what I did. There's not a day that goes by that I don't regret it." "Regret it?" I scoffed. "You left me stranded in a parking lot with a cart full of groceries. You disappeared without a word. Regret doesn't even begin to cover it, Adriana." Tears welled up in her eyes. "I know. I was young and stupid and scared." "Scared?" I repeated, incredulous. "Scared of what?" She hesitated again, her gaze flickering away from mine. "Scared of us, of where we were going." I felt trapped, Julian. Suffocated. "Trapped?" I said, the anger starting to simmer beneath the surface. We were building a life together. We had plans. What was so terrifying about that? She finally met my gaze, her eyes filled with pain. "It wasn't you, Julian. It was me. I wasn't ready. I wasn't ready for that kind of commitment." I panicked. "So you just ran?" I asked, the disbelief evident in my voice. She nodded, tears streaming down her face now. "Yes, I ran. It was selfish and cruel, and I've lived with that guilt every single day." "Where did you go?" I asked, the question hanging heavy in the air. She hesitated again. I went to California. I had a friend there." "And Mark?" I asked, the name finally escaping my lips. Her eyes widened, a flicker of surprise crossing her face. "Mark? What about Mark?" "He was your colleague," I said, my voice flat. "The one I always suspected." "No," she said quickly, shaking her head vehemently. "No, it wasn't like that. Mark was just a friend. He helped me when I left." I studied her face, trying to discern the truth in her words. After all these years, it was hard to know what to believe. "Why now, Adriana?" I asked, cutting through the years of unanswered questions. "Why come back now?" She took another deep breath, her hands still trembling. Because I saw your wedding announcement." My blood ran cold. My wedding announcement? But I wasn't married. I hadn't been in a serious relationship since Adriana. "I don't know what you're talking about," I said, my voice confused. "It was online," she insisted. "A picture of you and a beautiful woman. Anya, I think her name was." A wave of dizziness washed over me. Anya, that was my daughter's name. My daughter who would be turning 14 next month. "Adriana," I said slowly, my mind struggling to process this. "I'm not married. I have a daughter. Her name is Anya." Confusion flickered across her face, quickly replaced by a look of dawning horror. "A daughter?" "But the announcement." "There was no announcement," I said firmly. "There's no wife. There's just me and my daughter." Her face paled. "But I saw it. I swear I did." "Then you saw something that wasn't real?" "Adriana," I said, the pieces of the puzzle starting to click into place. "Because I haven't been with anyone seriously since you left." The realization hit her like a physical blow. The color drained from her face, and she gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Oh my God," she whispered, her voice filled with a mixture of shock and despair. "Oh my God, what have I done?" And in that moment, as I looked at the woman who had once been my wife, a terrifying thought crossed my mind. If she hadn't been following my life, if she had believed I was married, then why was she really here? And what was this mysterious wedding announcement she had seen? The silence in the diner stretched, thick with unspoken words and the weight of the past. Adriana's tear-streaked face was a stark contrast to the confident woman I remembered. The wedding announcement she'd seen, it was a figment of her imagination, a phantom of a life I hadn't lived. "What have I done?" she repeated, her voice barely audible. I watched her, a strange mix of pity and resentment churning within me. 15 years. 15 years I had spent rebuilding, struggling, and finally finding a measure of peace. And now, here she was back in my life, a ghost from a past I tried to bury. "What do you mean? What have I done?" I asked, my voice guarded. She looked up at me, her eyes pleading. I made a terrible mistake, Julian. Leaving you, it was the worst decision of my life. That's easy for you to say now, isn't it? I countered, the bitterness rising again. You walked away without a backward glance. You didn't have to struggle to find a place to sleep, to worry about your next meal. "I know," she sobbed, "and I'm so sorry. I was foolish and selfish, and I didn't realize what I had until it was gone." "Gone?" I echoed. "Adriana, you didn't just lose me. You lost everything we had built together. You threw it all away." She nodded, her tears falling silently onto the table. "I know, and I deserve all the anger you feel towards me." We sat in silence for a few moments, the only sound her quiet sobs. The years melted away, and for a fleeting moment, I saw the vulnerable young woman I had once loved. But the memory was quickly overshadowed by the image of myself, standing alone and bewildered in that grocery store parking lot. "Why are you really here, Adriana?" I asked, cutting through the emotional haze. "You didn't come back after 15 years just to apologize." She hesitated, her gaze shifting away from mine again. She reached in her purse and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper. Her hand trembled as she unfolded it and slid it across the table towards me. It was a medical bill. The numbers swam before my eyes, a staggering amount, far more than I made in a month, maybe even a year. The name at the top of the bill was hers. "What is this?" I asked, my brow furrowed. It's for my treatment," she said, her voice barely a whisper. I've been sick." "Sick?" I repeated. "What's wrong?" She hesitated again, her eyes filled with shame. It's serious, Julian. I need surgery, and I don't have the money." My heart sank. This was it then? The real reason for her reappearance. Not some sudden realization of lost love, but a desperate plea for help. "How much do you need?" I asked, my voice flat. She named a figure, a sum that made my stomach clench. It was a significant amount of money, the kind of money I had worked years to save. "And you came to me?" I asked, incredulous. "After 15 years of silence, you think I'm just going to hand over that kind of money?" "I know it's a lot to ask," she said, her voice trembling, "but I don't have anyone else to turn to. My parents, they're gone. I lost touch with most of my friends after I left. And Mark, he's not in the picture anymore." The mention of Mark sent a fresh wave of suspicion through me. What had happened there? Had he abandoned her too? "Why should I help you, Adriana?" I asked, the question hanging heavy in the air. "You left me with nothing. You forced me to rebuild my life from scratch. Why should I bail you out now?" Tears streamed down her face again. "I don't expect you to forgive me, Julian. I know I don't deserve it. But please, I'm desperate. This surgery, it could save my life." I looked at the bill, then at Adriana's pale, drawn face. A moral dilemma raged within me. Part of me wanted to slam the door in her face, to make her pay for the pain she had caused me. But another part, a small, almost forgotten part, remembered the woman I had once loved, the woman I had promised to care for in sickness and in health. I need time to think about this, Adriana, I said finally, my voice weary. I understand, she said, nodding. Can I call you? I hesitated for a moment, then scribbled my number on a napkin and slid it across the table. She picked it up, her fingers brushing mine. The brief contact sent a strange shiver through me. Thank you, Julian, she whispered. Thank you for even considering it. She stood up, her movements slow and hesitant. She looked frail, vulnerable, a far cry from the vibrant woman who had walked out of my life 15 years ago. I watched her walk towards the door, her silhouette framed against the twilight outside. As she stepped out into the night, I was left alone in the quiet diner, the medical bill lying on the table like a stark reminder of the unexpected turn my life had taken. The bell above the door jingled again, and I looked up, startled. Standing in the doorway was Maria, her brow furrowed with concern. Everything all right, Julian? She asked, her eyes searching mine. I saw her leave. Who was that? That was Adriana, I said, the name feeling foreign on my tongue. Maria's eyes widened in surprise. Adriana? You're your ex-wife? I nodded slowly. What did she want? Maria asked, her voice filled with curiosity. I hesitated, unsure of how much to tell her. Maria had been a loyal friend, a constant source of support over the years. She deserved to know something. She needs help, I said finally. She's sick. She needs money for surgery. Maria's expression softened with sympathy. Oh, Julian, that's tough. Yeah, I said, sighing. It is. I looked down at the medical bill again, the staggering sum mocking me from the table. 15 years. 15 years of building a new life, of finding happiness again. And now, the woman who had shattered my world was back, asking me to save hers. The irony was almost unbearable. As I started to clean up the diner, the weight of the decision pressing down on me, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, my heart skipping a beat. It was a message from an unknown number. Julian, it's Adriana. Thank you again for listening. There's something else I need to tell you. Something important. Can we meet again tomorrow? My blood ran cold. What else could she possibly want? What other secrets was she hiding? The unexpected reappearance of Adriana had already thrown my life into turmoil. What new twist was waiting just around the corner? The message from Adriana hung in the air, a digital breadcrumb leading to yet another unknown. What else could she possibly need to tell me? The thought gnawed at me throughout the rest of the evening, a persistent hum beneath the surface of my usual routine. The next morning, I found myself surprisingly calm. The initial shock of seeing Adriana had worn off, replaced by a quiet resolve. I had spent 15 years building this life, a life that was good, a life that included my daughter, Anya, the true light of my existence. I wouldn't let Adriana's reappearance derail that. She arrived at the diner just after the breakfast rush, looking slightly less haggard than the day before, but still carrying an air of desperation. She slid into the same corner booth, her eyes searching mine. Thank you for meeting me again, Julian, she said, her voice softer this time. What did you want to tell me, Adriana? I asked, cutting straight to the chase. She took a deep breath, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. It's about why I really left. I waited, my expression neutral. I told you I panicked, she began, her voice trembling slightly. And that was part of it. But there was more. She hesitated, her gaze dropping to the table. I was seeing someone else, Julian. The words hit me with a dull thud, surprisingly devoid of the sharp pain I might have expected years ago. It was an answer to a question I had long since stopped asking. Mark? I asked, the name slipping out almost involuntarily. She nodded slowly. Yes. It started a few months before I left. I know it was wrong, terribly wrong, but I was confused. He made me feel seen in a way that I didn't feel with you anymore. A wave of sadness washed over me, not for myself, but for the young, insecure woman Adriana had been. We had been so close, or so I thought. How had I missed her unhappiness? And how did that work out? I asked, my voice devoid of sarcasm. She gave a bitter laugh. It didn't. He wasn't the person I thought he was. The moment I left, the moment I needed him, he disappeared. Just like I disappeared on you. The irony wasn't lost on me. So you ran from one mistake into another, I said quietly. She nodded, tears welling up in her eyes again. Yes, and I've paid for it ever since. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of her confession hanging between us. It explained a lot, the abruptness of her departure, the lack of contact. It didn't excuse it, but it offered a clearer picture of the past. And the wedding announcement? I asked. She shook her head, a look of confusion on her face. I don't know. I saw it on some online directory, a picture of you and a young girl, with the caption Julian and Anya's wedding. I just assumed. A wave of protectiveness washed over me. Anya was my world. The thought of Adriana seeing something like that, even if it was a mistake, felt intrusive. Anya is my daughter. Adriana, I said firmly. There was no wedding announcement. There is no wife. She nodded, her face etched with a mixture of understanding and regret. So, I said, bringing the conversation back to the present. You need money for surgery. She looked at me, her eyes filled with a desperate hope. Yes. Please, Julian. I don't know what else to do. I looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time in 15 years. I saw a woman who was scared, vulnerable, and facing a difficult situation. But I also saw the woman who had walked out on me, who had left me to pick up the pieces of a shattered life. The anger I had once felt was gone, replaced by a quiet sense of closure. I had moved on. I had built a good life for myself and Anya. I had found happiness again, not in the way I had once imagined, but in a way that was real and lasting. Adriana, I said, my voice calm and steady. I'm not going to give you the money. The hope in her eyes flickered and died, replaced by a look of despair. But why? Because I said I've moved on. I built a new life here, a life that doesn't include you. I worked hard for everything I have, and I need to prioritize my daughter and our future. I paused, choosing my words carefully. I don't hate you, Adriana. I don't even feel angry anymore. What you did hurt me deeply, but in a strange way, it also made me stronger. It forced me to find my own path. But I'm going to die if I don't get this surgery, she pleaded, tears streaming down her face again. I'm sorry to hear that. Adriana, I said, my voice firm but not unkind. But I can't be the one to help you. You made your choices 15 years ago, and I have to make mine now. I reached into my wallet and pulled out a few $100s. I slid it across the table towards her. This is all I can offer. It might help you for a little while. She looked at the money, then back at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of disappointment and resignation. She picked up the bills, her hand trembling. Thank you, she whispered, her voice barely audible. She stood up, her shoulders slumped, and walked towards the door. This time, as she stepped out into the sunlight, I didn't follow her with my gaze. I watched her go, a chapter of my life finally closing. Maria came over to my table, her expression sympathetic. Are you all right, Julian? I nodded, a sense of peace settling over me. Yes, Maria. I think I finally am. I looked around my diner, at the familiar faces of my regulars, at the framed picture of Anya on the counter. This was my life now. It wasn't the life I had planned, but it was a good life. A life filled with love, friendship, and a quiet sense of contentment. The pain of the past was still there, a faint scar that would always remind me of what I had been through. But it no longer defined me. I had survived. I had rebuilt. And I had found happiness again, not in the echoes of what was lost, but in the promise of what was yet to come. The finality of my decision felt right, a necessary step in truly moving forward. There was no bitterness, no desire for revenge, just a quiet acceptance of the path I had chosen and the life I had built.